want to talk to you about anything you want to talk about. Let's see. You emailed us 3 things. Where do you want to start?
Yes. So there's so much to talk to you about. And one of my specific things that I'm definitely not wanting to talk about is anything to do with Corona or lockdown or any of that stuff, because I think we're all sick to death of all of it, no matter whether we're hugely fearful, not fearful at all, whatever. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is what with all the goings on with the riots, with the hashtag George Floyd, and very unfortunate what happened to that gentleman. But with the protests now kind of rising in the UK as we speak, and over the next few days there's going to be protests in the UK, is my country is desperate for the riots you had. So those who are dissatisfied with our government, those who dislike Boris Johnson, those who still believe they can overturn Brexit, anybody who wants to create political upheaval in the UK is looking at New York, at the riots in Denver, at the dreadful scenes we've seen in Minneapolis, and they are wanting some of that for this country. And that's just baffling and bonkers, but utterly predictable, and they are mass gatherings planned for this very weekend coming.
And I was just saying in the previous segment, and by the way, Albin, this is the 11, not the 10. I was just saying that the particular difficulty that we have, and this has always existed at least for quite a while, but it's now particularly clear that some good things, some legitimate things have been hijacked by genuinely wicked people. And so in America, in other words, even if you want to be part of a peaceful protest in memory of George Floyd, it has been hijacked by the most cynical people. Some of them are ANTIFA cynical people who are wicked and organized. Others are simply opportunist criminals who know that because of white guilt and because of lack of leadership, they can break into stores and steal things, and it's all sort of mixed up with George Floyd and these kinds of issues, and they're going to get away with it. And so the idea is that leaders they don't have the guts to clarify, to separate the wheat from the tares, and to say, this is legitimate, this is illegitimate. And because of that, right here in Manhattan on the Upper East Side, all these shops are being boarded up because the incredibly high taxes we pay, obviously it means nothing. The cops, nobody's able to do anything. It's a kind of madness, frankly.
It is a kind of madness, and I think it's almost made worse by this parallel thing we have as we straddle the Atlantic. You have Manhattan, where of course that you do have loads and loads of people who are employed in industries. They are living hand to mouth pretty much, and they have found themselves recently unemployed. But you also have the sons and daughters of the wealthiest of society who have been pushed through the education system and altogether lost their minds as a result of it. And that's very true, of course, for London, where there is a mass gathering of young people, usually called Hamish or Claudia or Florence.
These are the posh names.
They're sort of wealthy kids.
Right.
Yeah, and these are sort of the people that shop in Whole Foods to do their weekly shop. Those sorts of people should never be allowed into politics, nor should they be allowed to protest. It's the sort of wealthy kids, bored at the moment actually, because there's nothing much else to do, that will be in the middle of all this, encouraging others to get amongst it, to have violence towards the police, to break stuff. And I think that's very unfortunate. The other thing that's unfortunate is at a time where you rightly say, we need leadership, whether that be political or through our churches or whatever. The Archbishop of Canterbury, one of the most senior voices in the Church of England, he just said, I pray those of us who are white Christians repent of our own prejudices and do the urgent work of becoming better allies to our brothers and sisters of color. And of course, it's yet another political statement from the church, and it picks out white Christians as being racist simply by the fact that they're white. And of course, I don't think that's the sort of divisive rhetoric we need on either side, and particularly not from church leaders.
Well, where this is coming from, of course, and this is what's so hard, this is what takes real vision and clarity and leadership to articulate. But the idea of systemic racism, the idea of white privilege, I reject both of those ideas as manufactured by people who are really cultural Marxists. And when you defeat them and you say, for example, I know that I'm not a racist, I've dedicated my life to not being a racist, I have not committed racial acts, and they say, oh, that doesn't matter, you are a racist by our new definition. And so this idea of systemic racism is at the heart of it, and it's why people like the poor Archbishop of Canterbury, they seem obliged to make these statements as though yesterday they had been, down there with Bull Connor, trying to keep little black kids out of school. It's bizarre.
It is bizarre, and at a time when you should be, it feels like he needs to be welcoming in the flock, as in the whole flock. Opening the doors and his arms to everybody, being someone who could be a sort of a beacon of hope in times that have been prolonged times of trouble. No, instead he singles out a certain community and tells them to take their knees and beg for forgiveness. And I don't think that's where the heart of the nation is, or where we need to be, when clearly his churches are empty, because he is forever politicizing the church and all that there is as part of the church. And I think it's that kind of stuff that people are seeing and thinking, how is this even happening towards our churches now? Our church leaders are perpetuating this idea that all whites are to blame. And we saw that recently during Corona lockdown with a poem called You Clap for Me Now, where BAME, Black and Minority Ethnic Individuals inside our health service, were almost targeting white people to say, oh, you need our help now, do you? Oh, you're clapping for us now, are you? As if by some facet of their imagination, we had been racist all along. And It's that idea, you will accept if you're white that you have been racist all along.
Yeah. And of course, these people were never paid, or were they?
Yeah, well, of course.
So let me, since you bring up the Archbishop of Canterbury, I think something that I've been saying recently, speaking as a Christian, I think we have to remind ourselves that the whole idea of the abolition of slavery, the abolition of the slave trade, and the civil rights movement was led by Christians who were people of tremendous dignity. When I think of Rosa Parks, I think of Dr. King, and this is, of course, more recently, but these were people of tremendous dignity, and they understood that their dignity and their being above reproach was what gave them the moral authority to speak to people with whom they might have had some disagreement. That has been thrown out the window. And around 1968, when Dr. King was killed, we see that movement was hijacked, and it seems to be hijacked over and over, so that now even what was hijacked has been hijacked by Antifa and hijacked by cynical thugs who just want to, get some Nike sneakers.
Yeah, absolutely. And hijacked indeed by Democrat governors in America or left-leaning politicians here in Europe. So, for example, in the Netherlands, lockdown is still fairly well policed. There are no businesses open. You have to be socially distanced to X. There's no sports facilities open, la-da-da-da-da. But when there was this protest in Amsterdam, the mayor, a female recently elected from the left, was there encouraging people, of course, to come along to this protest, didn't have a mask on herself, no social distancing to be seen. And it's almost the hijacking of people's fears. And then it's thrown back in their faces because, of course, at a time where Britain is producing a report saying BAME deaths were 4 times the rate of white deaths. But of course, who do we see represented most strongly in these protests? It's the BAME community. So even logic
That's exactly where we are. It's taking its own tail. Forgive me, Katie. We're going to go to a break. We will be right back, folks, with Katie Hopkins. Don't go away. Folks, welcome back. I'm talking to Katie Hopkins. That's right, Katie Hopkins. Across the ocean. I don't know how we're managing to do this, Katie. The idea that a vast ocean separates us, and yet you're right here. Welcome.
Of course. And in truth, of course, for good patriotic Americans, for your supporters and mine here, we aren't really separated. You know, we always say we are infinitely connected. And I feel that really strongly. You know, I do think there is going to be such a great time when we are all back together or able to be in the same rooms together. I think, you know, August, September time, there's going to be so much strength and vitality, and we need to kind of remind ourselves of that occasionally, because it all feels a bit dry and crusty at the moment.
Very good. Very well put, and utterly true. You know, all these things sort of blend together. We were going to talk about Hong Kong. It's an extraordinary thing, isn't it? In other words, we have people here in America advocating for socialism and using some kind of fascist tactics. And then you have people in Hong Kong fighting for democracy against the Communist Party of China, which is as wicked as it gets and as genuinely racist and cynical as one could ever be. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, and you know, something you just said about the dignity of protests, historical protests that were part of a much bigger movement, Rosa Parks and the rest. I think that's where Hong Kong protesters, there's such a resonance with that for me, the dignity of those protesters. The protesters in Hong Kong, for anybody that's not watching that story unfold, they are trying to push back on China looking to impose a security law on Hong Kong. Since 40 years before, there's always been agreed that Hong Kong and China were two different laws, but they were the same territory, but two different laws. China's trying to push back on that ever since the British left. China have wanted to take control, and they've just passed in their parliament a new security bill. Now, whenever you hear the words security bill, I urge all of you to have your hairs up on end and your ears up and your eyes open, because as soon as something's called something that sounds comfortable, like security bill, you know something dark is going on when communist China are involved. And of course, what this actually means is that the communists would take full control of Hong Kong and its population. They would impose draconian policing measures. They would be able to police with their own police forces, the communist police forces, Hong Kong. So very much the democracy, the liberty, everything that Hong Kong is would be taken away overnight.
But Katie, didn't we know that the communists were going to do this? And I remember in 1999 when this switch was happening, I thought to myself, who would ever think that the communists would stick to their promises or not do what they have historically done since the beginning of their existence? They live to do that, and they're looking only for opportunities, and when the opportunity comes, they jump in. Now, because of the chaos happening in the United States, suddenly we've taken our eyes off the ball, and they're doing these things right now. They know it.
I so agree with you. I so agree. The fact that when the British departed, they just signed a 40-year agreement, you know, it very gives a sense of the short-sightedness of politicians, that as long as during their lifetime of their period of authority, they're able to provide some sort of top cover for themselves. Obviously, very soon, as you rightly say, that was always going to fall down. But in terms of the dignity of the protesters, Hong Kongers protest using umbrellas. You know, when piles of bricks are left out, hoping they'll throw them, they build little tiny walls for the police to fall over as they're trying to defend the territory. You know, they are the sweetest protesters, and they clear up after themselves. But the point being, and the news story is, and it's just breaking today as we speak, is that Boris Johnson has said he will not leave Hong Kong aside, because these are British nationals in many sense. They have British nationality in a sense. He's saying that 3 million of them will have the right to come to the UK, have a 12-month visa, if you will, and a route to citizenship. And to give you an idea, that is 40% of the population of Hong Kong. And Boris is saying that he's willing to bring them here. I'm just looking, BNO, British nationality overseas. He will give them a path to citizenship in the UK if China persists with this security bill. So that's really big news. And small point, if I may, the delightful thing is that people like me or other Brexiteers, random Brits, ordinary Brits, are thrilled because Hong Kongers will be hardworking. They'll want the best for their kids. Yeah. They'll keep their houses tidy. They won't cause any issues in our country. They'll want the best for wherever they are. And so we've been called racist for so long for wanting our country back and to make Britain great. But it has nothing to do with being fearful of outsiders. We just want people that will help build our country, and Hong Kongers would do exactly that. So big things going on with regards to Hong Kong.
Well, that's called leadership, and thank the Lord for Boris Johnson. I mean, I have to say that, you know, you realize at times like this how far a little leadership goes. And, you know, the idea that Boris Johnson is also standing with those in Hong Kong, how important that is. Trump has done the same thing, you know, has made noises saying, listen, you better be careful. That's what presidents and prime ministers are supposed to do. And in this country, we have had a number of leaders who haven't done that. They've given mixed signals. So we were just talking about Mayor de Blasio of New York. His daughter was arrested in one of these riots, and he said he was proud of her. It was kind of like, you know, a woke badge of honor. And of course, he's sending mixed signals. We're going to go to break. Folks, we'll be right back with Katie Hopkins. Yes. Hey, folks, welcome back. It's the Eric Metaxas Show, and I am talking to Katie Hopkins. And Katie, you're talking to me.
I am. I'm one of the few remaining females on the planet still talking to Eric Metaxas. And do you know why? You know why I'm still talking to you?
Yes.
It's because I don't know how many of your lovely viewers and listeners know, but you have the most beautiful team helping to make you as gorgeous as you are. So you have a beautiful team behind you, Albin and the rest. I love them all. And you all together are absolute dears. You're my favorites. I know.
Albin is a fraud. I would never say that publicly, but he's a fraud.
You're a darling.
Let me say that.
I am not a fraud.
How do you know? Let me ask you about you. There are things about which you write and speak that are not really covered here in the American media, such as what's happening in South Africa. Let's go there.
Yes. And so if anybody has followed us through our time together, they will know that I've spent some time in South Africa because white farmers are under attack. Anybody with South African relatives or friends will know white farmers are being systematically pushed, forced, I would say genocided from their land by black gangs under the governorship of ANC.
Let me just hit pause for a moment. That is almost unbelievable. In other words, what I have read on that, I almost can't believe it. It's extraordinary to me that all these years after Mandela, another man of dignity, that it has devolved to this kind of vengeance and genuine racism. It's heartbreaking, frankly.
It is, and I think it's also a glimpse into the future for many of us, because along with confiscating land, so expropriation without compensation, which basically means we take your land and we're not giving you anything for it. There are draconian measures where if you have a business, you can only receive finance if you're majority black owned. If you're a white person, you can't be given employment because black economic rights triumph all others. And I can see measures like that coming into play in America and the UK off the back of this latest movement. But anyway, so for a long time, I've been trying to help talk about the stories of simple white South African farmers who want nothing more than to farm their land peacefully. But they are being hunted down. They're down to about 4% now, the whites in South Africa. More white South Africans live outside of South Africa than currently live within South Africa because they have been persecuted so heavily. But in some exclusive news that I'm only revealing to you, it's just something that I heard last night and have been working with a team. The first of the white families that we are helping to bring out of South Africa and give a new life to in Eastern Europe, one of the countries there, two of them actually, are offering citizenship, or at least a temporary route in, for white South African families. And so the first of those families will start arriving, and the aim is to get 5,000 white South African families out within 34 months. And the idea is they can pack one suitcase, get on the plane, and at the other end there will be people to welcome them, homes to put them in, and a new grain farming. They've created a need for grain farming, and these guys will be able to start new lives in Eastern Europe. So, it's sort of epic and biblical in proportion, but I do think this is the start of another mass movement of people that isn't talked about, and I think America can understand it. Look at America, and you see the movement already happening within America, people leaving certain states to go to another. That's sort of a surface level touching of what's happening in bigger scale. My Jewish friends are leaving for Israel. White families like mine are looking to Eastern Europe. And this will be the first of the flow of white South Africans out of South Africa.
It's a stunning thing to me that the leadership in South Africa has allowed things to come to this pass. I mean, clearly this would not have been what Mandela wanted. But again, it's kind of like, we were talking about Rosa Parks and Dr. King. What they dreamt of, it's very sad. I mean, things are being drawn along racial lines by blacks. And you think, wait a second, the whole point of this was to get beyond that. So to hear that the whites are being persecuted that way, and of course, let's face it, the idea is, well, they deserve it. They did it to us. Yeah. In other words, this is payback. This is it's very sad, but it's amazing to me that they really are moving en masse to places like Eastern Europe. In other words, they are fearing for their lives, clearly, and their futures.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, any of your listeners, if you imagine looking around your home and your family and what you've got in your garage or your loft, or imagine just leaving all of that. Things have to be, sometimes I think you need enormous courage to stay somewhere, particularly if it's South Africa or if it's somewhere hostile, somewhere very difficult. But I think it takes even more courage actually to walk out of a door and leave behind everything you've ever known. But certainly the idea of this charity who are starting this, a human rights lawyer who's at the heart of it all, their view is, why not get yourself safe, hold yourselves together as a family, and one day your children will be able to go back and reclaim the land that is yours, because South Africa will need the white farmers. It will find itself in famine, just as Zimbabwe has done. It will find itself unable to farm its land because you need those farmers with their knowledge, and that one day the white children will be able to return. So certainly some kind of holding, an idea of a generational holding pen to wait for things to improve.
And what are the nations? Can you say in Eastern Europe what the nations are?
One of them that we can talk about is Georgia. Now, not much is known about Georgia, but what has happened is this human rights lawyer has made it such that he's created a demand for a certain crop. He's shown that South Africans can deliver that crop. Georgia wants to grow its farming population, and so he's matched a problem with a solution.
Hey folks, coming up in hour 2, Charlie Kirk. Have you heard of him? I have not, but he's supposed to be a very interesting young man. I want, before Katie, I let you talk about your new pet. I want to read the closing lines of George Eliot's Middlemarch. So beautiful. It's talking about the protagonist. I can't think of her name, but it says, but the effect of her being on those around her was incalculably diffusive. For the growing good of the world is partly dependent on unhistoric acts, and that things are not so ill with you and me as they might have been is half owing to the number who lived faithfully a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs. When people do beautiful things, they don't always get recognized. I'm glad we did mention the name of this activist, this lawyer doing these things, but there's so many things out there, so many folks out there right this minute doing beautiful things, and we need to know that, you know, they're holding it all together. And folks, if you're listening, if you're one of those, or if you're thinking about being one of those, we just want to encourage you. So Katie, you have a black bird as a pet, have you?
Yes. So firstly, I think maybe you could actually just do that with all of your shows going forward. You could just read to people, because I found that to be quite deeply therapeutic. I was off then, just listening. I forgot we were actually chit-chatting about life, love, and the universe. So definitely think about doing that going forward, just reading books.
Indeed, I shall.
Yeah.
No, but that's one of those lines. I mean, it's just, you know, it's so true and so beautiful. And why read all of Middlemarch? Just go right to the last paragraph. Anyway, but you really must tell us about
go to the summary.
The pet you have.
So, despite, you know, lockdown and us agreeing we're not talking about it, I do think that there have been great moments that have come out of this, and I don't mean that in a sort of cynical BBC state broadcaster trying to be overexcited about everything at all times and celebrities pretending to have a fabulous time. None of that. It's been absolutely ridiculous, and I loathe it, and being made to be a full-time mum has been hideous. However, I have spent a lot of time in my garden. I have spent time trying to make my garden better. I have wire brushed my garden shed. There's not many times, I know, don't even. I wire brushed.
Your husband, ma'am.
Yes, I do, but he was doing, he has grouted the conservatory, Eric Metaxas, while I have wire brushed a garden shed, and that is not a euphemism. That is just straight talk.
Sounds like a wonderful marriage. This is amazing.
I know. We're like, you know, we're like that practical couple, except we're not. We're just pretending to be while lockdown happened. But the very marvelous thing is that I have gained a new friend, which I was in desperate need of, because as a white Christian conservative in the UK, I obviously don't have many friends. No. So Colin has come along into my life. Colin is a blackbird, which is a standard garden bird. I don't know how to describe him other than he's that big. He has black feathers and a lovely yellow beak. And he comes to me when I'm in the garden. He comes and waddles by my side when I'm planting in case I dig up a worm. When it's really sunny, he lies, I'm now being Colin, the blackbird. He lies on my grass with his mouth open, airing his feathers. I love him very, very deeply indeed. And I've just found out this morning, Colin is now being followed by a lady blackbird with brown feathers. So I think Colin may have found himself a wife.
This is
We say, and I ask you to say with us, lift up your voices in this great meeting in the heart of England, and to all the world, a message, England lives and marches on.